On Friday, Lindsey Graham was in Kiev shaking hands with Zelensky, announcing the biggest legislative win of his year and telling reporters he had never been more optimistic in his life. 36 hours later, he was dead. And within minutes of the announcement, a big chunk of the internet decided Iran did it. Another chunk decided Russia did it, and almost nobody wanted to sit with the third most uncomfortable possibility of all. So let's walk through what we actually know. On Friday, July 10th, Graham was in Kiev on his 10th visit to Ukraine. He met with Zelensky. He toured a drone factory, and then he stood in front of cameras and announced that the White House had finally agreed to back his Russia sanctions bill. His words, and this is interesting, quote, "It means it's going to become law." And then he flew home, and on Saturday he was back in Washington, and that afternoon he called President Trump. Trump himself confirmed the call. And at around 8:30 that evening, paramedics were called to Graham's home on Capitol Hill for chest pains. The dispatch audio mentions cardiac arrest, CPR in progress. So Graham was declared dead at George Washington University Hospital, and his office announced it around 2 in the morning. A brief and sudden illness. He had turned 71 exactly 2 days earlier, and on Sunday morning he was supposed to be on Meet the Press. Now, why is everyone asking questions instead of just mourning? Well, because of what happened 5 days before he died. At Khamenei's funeral in Tehran, mourners marched with posters showing Graham's face inside a red crosshair. Target number 1, Lindsey Graham. And underneath the words, "Sooner or later, your heads will roll." Graham saw those posters and he joked about them publicly. He said, "At least they used a good photo of me. Judge me by my enemies." But 5 days later, the man is dead. And on the Russian side of the board, the timing looks just as loaded. Graham died hours after coming home from Kiev, where his last public act was announcing a sanctions package aimed straight at Moscow. So, no, if you're asking questions, you are not crazy. And by the way, most people are not even claiming murder. For every post asserting it, there are like 2 just asking. And that is a healthy instinct. We're talking about 2 governments that publicly wanted this man gone, and he died within a week of one of them putting his face in a crosshair. But now comes the part where we have to be adults about this. Because the timing is suspicious is not evidence, it's just a feeling. Graham was 71 years old. He had just flown across the Atlantic into an active war zone and back, all inside a single week on a senator's schedule, which is brutal at any age. The FBI is assisting the local police, and federal law enforcement sources say there is no indication of foul play. And there is something we need to consider. Sudden cardiac death in a 71-year-old man after long-haul travel is statistically the most boring sentence in medicine. It happens every single day to people nobody ever put on a poster. So I'm not going to tell you he was murdered. I don't believe that's the leading explanation. But I am going to tell you what my field actually sees here, because the behavior around this death is more interesting than the death itself. So let's start with Iran. Real assassination programs don't announce their targets on posters board at a funeral. So think about it. If you genuinely intend to kill a man, the last thing you do is tell the world his name, because now every death he could possibly die points back at you. Those posters were never an operations plan. They were theater for the home crowd. We're talking about a regime that just lost a war and lost its supreme leader, and it's desperately needed to look dangerous while its own negotiators were quietly talking to Washington. But now watch what a natural death does for them. When your named enemy dies of anything at all, clot, a heart attack, old age. You collect on the threat without lifting a finger. The crowd connects the dots for you for free. And Tehran didn't just celebrate. Iranian state television went further, congratulating the Iranian people and thanking the military and the intelligence services for the success. They even aired an animation depicting his death. Now, think about what that actually means. When a professional intelligence agency kills someone, it goes silent. It claims plausible deniability. When a regime needs a win it didn't earn, it gloats and makes a cartoon. So Tehran's media taking a bow is not a confession. It is a regime cashing a check it never wrote. Now, let's talk about Russia. If a service actually poisoned a sitting United States senator, the one thing it needs afterward is silence, distance, boredom. What we are getting instead is Russian propaganda channels openly mocking the death, calling it timely, and boosting clips of Iranians celebrating. And yeah, that loudness is the giveaway. Gloating is terrible tradecraft for the guilty, but it is excellent, cost-free psychological warfare for the merely lucky. So here's my read, and it's the third uncomfortable one. Both Moscow and Tehran gain more from your doubt than from the deed itself. The suspicion itself is the product. So every hour that Americans spend arguing about whether their own senator was assassinated is an hour of free deterrence for two governments that, right now cannot afford the real thing. So what should you actually watch for instead of arguing? So let's take a look. Let's keep an eye on the autopsy. If the toxicology comes back clean and gets released quickly, this story dies within a week. And it's already dying, by the way. If you track the volume on X, the suspicion peaked Sunday morning, and it has been fading every hour since, because a feeling without evidence has a half-life. But if the results are delayed or vague or never released, and that is the family's right, by the way, then the vacuum will fill itself, and no fact check on Earth will ever empty it again. But anyway, Graham's final public act was announcing that his Russia sanctions package would become law. Well, it is very hard for a senator to vote against a dead man's bill. So here's a forecast you can hold me to. If that package passes with his name attached to it, then Graham's death will have done more damage to Moscow than his last trip ever did. And one more ripple further east. The Gulf capitals are reading this through a completely different lens. Graham was the loudest voice in the Senate calling for strikes on Iran at the exact moment Washington and Tehran are negotiating over the Strait of Hormuz. The hawk leaving the room changes the temperature, perhaps. And you can be sure that Abu Dhabi and Riyadh noticed before the obituaries were even finished. But if you want my deeper analysis on geopolitics and the behavior of the people who run the world, make sure to check my geopolitics channel, The Power Pundit. Link in the description. And share this video with your family and friends so they know what's really going on. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the Battle Language Guy. Much love and bliss.